In honor of CIA's 75th anniversary, CIA Museum commissioned this one-of-a-kind piece of artwork. At first glance, it's easy to spot the iconic elements of the CIA seal: the compass rose, the shield, and the eagle. But if you look closely, you might discover some clever details hidden in plain sight. Painted by Tristan Eaton and titled 75 Years of Intelligence, this artwork features key moments from CIA history, from inception in 1947 all the way through our most recent mission. Hidden within the painting are subtle and maybe even covert references to CIA's mission, workforce, and values. This part of the painting looks like a beautiful starry sky, but is that all it is? There are 75 stars painted throughout the painting, and some of them are a part of a coded Braille message. The use of Braille is also a nod to CIA's commitment to accessibility and the diversity of its workforce. Though hard to see at first, the light blue shield features the seals of CIA's 5 directorates, and hidden within some of the light and dark blue rays are photos of artifacts related to the Argo mission and CIA's efforts during the Vietnam War. Starting clockwise from the center, each point of the compass rose represents a significant era in CIA history, to include the fall of the Soviet Union, the Cuban Missile Crisis, CIA's response to 9/11, and our most recent mission in the digital world. CIA's guiding principles: service, integrity, stewardship, excellence, courage, and teamwork are featured in the painting too. These principles are essential to the mission and to keep the CIA workforce on course as it works to protect the nation. The CIA mission is driven by the work of not just one officer, but of many officers coming together to accomplish what others cannot accomplish and go where others cannot go. Could there be more hidden messages and secret layers in the painting? Maybe someday we'll let you in on some more fun secrets about CIA's artwork that for now we can neither confirm nor deny.
CIA Museum is a learning tool to ensure its rich history is accessible to all. To keep the museum current, CIA renovated the entire museum in 2022, just in time for the agency's 75th anniversary. The museum design team worked hard to make sure the museum reflects the true diversity of CIA's workforce. Leaning heavily on the guidance of CIA officers who are blind, have low vision, are deaf or hard of hearing, as well as officers with mobility challenges, ensures a new space with greater accessibility. There are 3D tactile maps to guide visitors through the museum at 3 different locations. Points of interest for people who are blind or have low vision are highlighted throughout and explained via Braille. In the museum, there are 2 3D interactive tactile images. The tactile images are raised, so users are able to touch and feel the painting or photograph. When a hand moves across the 3D image, it triggers sensors in the painting that play sound effects or descriptions that help tell the story or describe the image. There are also buttons at the bottom of the tactile that provide audio narration and a detailed description of what the painting or photograph looks like, as well as information on various aspects of the mission and people involved. The narration buttons are in-depth audio labels for people who are blind or have low vision. There are 7 artifacts replicated by 3D imaging and cast in bronze. These artifact replicas are available for people to touch and experience with their hands. There are boots worn by an officer on the 2nd team into Afghanistan days after 9/11, a Minox-C spy camera, and a scale model of the supersonic A-12 aircraft. Each touch artifact is accompanied by a Braille label. To assist those who are deaf or hard of hearing, all the video interactives with sound have closed captioning and balanced volume. The interactives throughout the museum provide deep dives into CIA mission topics, so the touch screens can be fully controlled from multiple screen points, including different height levels for people in wheelchairs. Everything is arranged within the galleries to allow for safe and easy access to every exhibit. The mission of CIA Museum is to inform, instruct, and inspire. With its new renovation, CIA Museum proudly highlights agency history with greater accessibility to all.
The CIA goes to great lengths to get the mission done and to keep its people safe. A great example of that is CIA's proprietary cover airlines during the Vietnam War. In this case, you have artifacts related to CIA's cover airlines who helped get supplies and personnel in and out of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War. Civil Air Transport, or CAT, had a reputation for flying in hazardous conditions and for getting the mission done no matter what the odds. CAT started flying missions for the CIA in October of 1949 and was purchased by the CIA in August of 1950. 10 years later, CAT was reorganized as Air America and continued to provide mission support and search and rescue capabilities to the CIA during the Vietnam War. Air America, and CAT before it, was an American passenger and cargo airline. That means you or anyone else could purchase a ticket to fly on Air America. So CIA had to create the cover to make it look like a legitimate airline. Things like these fabulous bags were available. And because smoking is common at this point in history, of course you have to have a lighter with the logo on it. Air America even had branded chopsticks and fine dinnerware to serve meals on long flights. And the pilots had to look like pilots at this point in history. So you have a pilot's cap, crew buttons, and a wing pin. Continental Air Services Incorporated, or CASI, was owned by Continental Airlines and provided important contract support to the CIA during the war in Southeast Asia. CASI flew in food, medicine, and other essential supplies to isolated outposts during the Vietnam War. In this case, you'll again see the lengths that the CIA goes to create the cover. It's all about the details. This wristwatch was worn by pilots during the Vietnam War who flew for CASI. And the peaked cap, this is very common at this point in history for what a pilot would look like. And this insignia and tie clip were worn by legendary pilot Lee Gossett. Throughout the Vietnam War, the brave crews of these cover airlines enabled missions and saved countless lives. After all, Air America's motto was, anything, anywhere, anytime, professionally. When the Office of Strategic Services Director, William Donovan, set up the agency's research and development branch, he decided to personally recruit Massachusetts inventor and entrepreneur Stanley Lovell to run it. In the James Bond world, Lovell is the equivalent of Q, in charge of developing innovative spy technologies. According to Lovell, Donovan said, "I need every subtle device and every underhanded trick to use against the Germans and the Japanese. You will have to invent them all. You start tomorrow." One area of responsibility for Lovell was forgery, a place where science and art converged. This book, which belonged to Lovell, is full of forgery tests and samples OSS officers made during that time. This book includes OSS forged documents like passports, currency, stamps, and company letterhead, mostly in French and German. These items might not seem important, but they could be the difference between life and death during the war. American Office of Strategic Services and UK Special Operations executive officers confiscated things like the latest currency, ID cards, stamps, and ration books from Axis prisoners of the Allies. OSS and SOE officers also sent these types of items back to people they were helping get out of places like occupied France. Having the most up-to-date materials for reference was incredibly important. Anything leadership thought would help Allied personnel on future missions in occupied areas made its way into the hands of people working to create or improve upon forged documents. Here you have an example of an ID, which could be used to help individuals enter or exit an area undercover with a new alias. Here you have an example of money, which at times could get you information and assistance from locals by paying them. There was also a morale and propaganda division within the OSS that often used the skills of Lovell's forgery department. This stamp on display at CIA Museum looks like the real stamp of Hitler used at the time. But if you look closely, you'll see a sinister skeletal version of him is revealed. A subtle approach to influencing public opinion. The Research and Development Branch of the OSS laid the groundwork for CIA's current Directorate of Science and Technology, where science and art still converge to enable mission and keep our partners and officers safe. On December 30th, 2009, the CIA suffered its second highest casualty event at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Khost, Afghanistan. The CIA Museum has 2 exhibits that honor the lives lost that day. The CIA was in this part of Afghanistan working tirelessly to find terrorists who threatened the safety of this country and, more broadly, the world. The Khost attacker, whom the CIA was meeting with because he had confirmed access to extremist circles, detonated his suicide vest when CIA security went to check him and CIA officers went to greet him, killing 7 CIA officers and wounding 6 others. This sculpture in an atrium area of the CIA headquarters is one of the 2 exhibits. A member of the New York, New Jersey Port Authority Police Department crafted this memorial from steel recovered from the World Trade Center. On September 11, 2011, almost 2 years after the attacks at Forward Operating Base Chapman, the Port Authority Police Department presented this memorial to the CIA in honor and remembrance of those who lost their lives and for those who were wounded while trying to make the world a safer place. The 7 stars on display in the CIA Museum are a part of a second exhibit that expands on CIA's time in Afghanistan after 9/11 and highlights the sacrifices our officers made in the war on terrorism. After the attacks, the CIA created a memorial at Forward Operating Base Chapman that had these 7 stars, as well as 1 pair of boots for each life lost and a sign with the date of the attack. The CIA Museum has all elements of this memorial in its collection. In 2010, President Obama came to the CIA headquarters to pay his respects to the families of the fallen and to thank CIA officers for their continued commitment for taking on hard missions and their willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice in protecting our nation. One of the first things you see when you enter the CIA Museum is a wall of occupations. The design highlights jobs you probably thought never existed at the CIA, and so many more that are not seen. It takes expertise in a variety of specialties to really carry out and conduct a successful mission. And that includes one of the intelligence community's longest standing skills, map making. Tracing its roots back to October of 1941, CIA's Cartography Center has a long and proud history. Cartography has existed in the intelligence community even before CIA and its predecessor organization, the Office of Strategic Services. But its incredible contributions during World War II and the Cold War are proudly on display at CIA Museum. In this case are the tools of the trade used by OSS officers during World War II, things like a mechanical protractor, a mechanical dash line instrument, and a Stanley Improved Pantographs instrument. Cartography, map information, and topographic models formed the new map division. Geographers and cartographers amassed what would be the largest collection of maps in the world and produced maps and 3D plaster terrain models in support of strategic studies and military operational plans. The map division provided products that directly supported the planning strategy of the Allied invasion of North Africa and Italy. It also assessed the topographic conditions in other areas vital to the conduct of war, including in the Asia-Pacific theater. A little-known fun fact about OSS cartography is that during World War II, the actual map-making work was happening at Ford's Theater, where President Lincoln was assassinated. During the Cold War, the map-making skills of the CIA were called upon again. The Soviets intentionally introduced errors in their maps to prevent them from being used by foreign intelligence services for operational purposes, or by militaries during wartime. CIA officers created this map book to ensure the US government had accurate information. Initially created in the post-World War II years for US embassy personnel in the Soviet capital, its dissemination steadily expanded to become a key reference guide for personnel of other friendly embassies in Moscow, as well as for many US visitors. CIA needs these skills just as much today as we did in our past. And as the mission evolves, so do the job requirements. Today, the mission of the CIA Cartography Center is to provide a full range of maps, geographic analysis, and research in support of the agency, the White House, senior policymakers, and the intelligence community at large. The CIA seal is probably the most recognizable element of our organization, shown in countless movies and television series. This emblem is a vital part of our organization. But how did we get to this iconic seal? President Truman signed the National Security Act of 1947, which established the Central Intelligence Agency. 2 years later, Truman signed the CIA Act of 1949, which gave the agency the opportunity to create an official seal. So how was the seal selected? Believe it or not, it started with a contest. A notice was issued to all agency employees inviting them to submit suggestions for a suitable design for the seal. Originality and appropriateness rather than artistic talent were the criteria for judging. The initial contest yielded about 12 designs, but the judges deemed none of them to be acceptable. The CIA Museum staff doesn't know what all the employee designs looked like, but this design here is a favorite of the employee submissions. After none of the original submissions were selected, CIA then turned to the US Army Heraldic Branch, today's US Army Institute of Heraldry. The Heraldic Branch presented CIA leadership with several designs that were very similar to the seal we have today, but in a variety of color palettes. The agency submitted the design to President Truman, who approved the seal on 17 February 1950, and he signed several copies. Each part of the CIA seal has meaning. The American eagle is our national bird, but to the CIA it has even more meaning, as it represents alertness. Our mission is to stay vigilant, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and to keep an eye on things happening around the globe. The shield symbolizes defense and how the CIA is the nation's first line of defense from those who seek to harm us. Finally, the compass rose in the center of the shield signifies the convergence of intelligence into one central location. Walking across the CIA seal never gets old. It is a constant reminder that you are a part of an important mission here at CIA. On July 25, 2022, the President of the United States authorized a precision counterterrorism operation in Kabul, Afghanistan, that targeted and killed al-Qaeda current leader Ayman al-Zawahiri. Much like the mission that killed Osama bin Laden, models played an important role in ensuring mission success. This model of Zawahiri's house, which is on display at the CIA Museum, was used to brief President Biden on the location of Zawahiri and to provide details on the US government's proposed mission. It is located in a case in the area of the museum that is devoted to CIA missions in Afghanistan, including our first boots on the ground 15 days after 9/11 in 2001, and to the loss of life at the forward operating base in Khost, Afghanistan in 2009. Zawahiri was Osama bin Laden's deputy during the 9/11 attacks. He became the successor of al-Qaeda in 2011, following bin Laden's death during a US counterterrorism mission. In that mission, another exceptional model was used in the planning process. In the intervening years, Zawahiri continued to pose an active threat to US persons, interests, and national security. US intelligence had been watching for indications that al-Qaeda was relocating to Afghanistan. Using all-source intelligence, a team convened to analyze all the data it collected to confirm Zawahiri was indeed in Afghanistan at a particular safe house. Zawahiri was observed for sustained periods of time on multiple occasions on the balcony where he was ultimately struck. Working with model builders from the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, CIA officers used this model to brief the president and provide detailed and clear options he could consider. During the briefing on July 1st, President Biden closely examined the model, seeking additional insights into natural and man-made factors, including construction materials that could potentially impede the mission and harm civilians. The strike that targeted and killed Zawahiri took place on July 30th, 2022. The Zawahiri model is a great example of the entire intelligence community coming together to ensure mission success. The renovated CIA Museum has a new element that highlights the work of some of CIA's finest officers and teams. Our new standalone innovator cases, like the one behind me, honor officers who left an incredible impact on the mission and are a source of eternal inspiration. This case, for example, honors George Kieswalter, a legendary DO case officer who ran not one but two of the most important assets CIA had during the Cold War. Kieswalter handled two volunteers, Lieutenant Colonel Popov, the first Soviet military intelligence officer to spy for the United States, and Colonel Penkovsky, who provided vital information on Soviet missiles and other military capabilities for almost 18 months preceding the Cuban Missile Crisis. In this case are Kieswalter's passport and two matching sets of unusual cufflinks that the CIA made so that they could be used as a recognition mechanism, signaling to Lieutenant Colonel Popov that he could trust any CIA officer wearing them. This innovator case recognizes Dr. Albert Whelan. He earned his PhD in physics from MIT and, like a true leader, pushed the agency forward in advancing our capabilities. So much so that in 1963, he was asked to organize and lead the CIA's new Directorate of Science and Technology. In 1964, he earned these spurs as mementos of his flight aboard the A-12 reconnaissance aircraft. Both of these men and the work they did imparted a wealth of knowledge to successive generations of young officers. Barbara Robins' innovator case is a daily reminder of the sacrifices our officers of all ages and tenure make on behalf of the nation. Robins joined the CIA in 1963 at the age of 19 as a DO officer. Less than a year after joining, she felt compelled to make a difference in the fight against communism and volunteered to work in the largest and busiest CIA station at the time, Saigon. On the morning of March 30th, 1965, a Viet Cong vehicle loaded with a 300-pound bomb exploded near the embassy, killing Robins, another American, and several Vietnamese citizens. Only 21 years old at the time when she was killed, Barbara Robins is still the youngest officer memorialized on our wall. This is the Exceptional Service Medal that was presented posthumously to Robins, and the telegram her family received from President Johnson and First Lady Johnson, dated the day of their daughter's death. These officers and so many more are emphasized throughout the CIA Museum, and they'll be updated every few years to highlight more officers and CIA teams who, by their actions, example, innovations, and initiatives, took the agency in important new directions and helped shape our legacy.
The renovated CIA Museum features several cases with collections of artifacts from significant events or periods in CIA's history. The CIA took to the sky like never before during the Cold War. This exhibit section gives you an insider's look into CIA's photo reconnaissance missions. In the early 1950s, the United States recognized that its knowledge of Soviet strategic capabilities was dangerously weak. Stringent security behind the Iron Curtain had hindered traditional intelligence collection methods. The US government came to realize that overhead photo reconnaissance could help fill the intelligence gap, and President Dwight D. Eisenhower approved ambitious programs for CIA to develop three technological marvels: the high-flying U-2 aircraft, the supersonic A-12 aircraft, and the Corona satellite system. In this case, you can see a suit, helmet, and boots worn by a pilot on an actual U-2 mission. Pilots couldn't gain or lose more than 2 pounds, or they wouldn't be allowed to fly without a new suit being made. That's how precise these pressure suits needed to fit for full safety in the sky. This is the U-2 model created for pilot Francis Gary Powers' Senate testimony. He was shot down over the Soviet Union and later returned to the US in a prisoner swap. There's also the custom-made multi-layer A-12 pressure suit and oxygen supply system worn by pilot Ken Collins. It weighs 36 pounds. Each suit sustained life at 90,000 feet thanks to a dual-system pressurization controller and anti-suffocation protection. And here you have his Intelligence Star, awarded to him for flying one of the first Mach 3 plus combat reconnaissance missions in aviation history. This unassuming bag was vital to the successful recovery of Corona satellite film. Periodically, film canisters would be ejected from the satellite to be recovered. This bag was connected to the film bucket, and as it was descending, a parachute within the bag would deploy to slow the bucket down. A plane then hooked the parachute and reeled in the whole package. The tools and equipment shown in this case were used by CIA imagery analysts. The resulting intelligence products, starting with photographs taken by the U-2, made an enormous difference to the US, enabling it to progress from sophisticated guesswork about Soviet capabilities to evidence-based analysis. These technological and engineering breakthroughs, combined with the techniques of highly skilled analysts, helped the CIA pierce the Iron Curtain and keep the Cold War cold.
When entering the new CIA museum, your instinct is to immediately start looking around for the one-of-a-kind spy artifacts on display. But just like the CIA missions, there is more than what meets the eye. CIA museum staff knew they wanted to bring visitors on a 360-degree historical experience. After thinking outside the box, the ceiling became a great way to tie specific missions and periods in history together. The ceiling boasts 5 types of code, all containing messages that we hope someday someone will solve. The museum starts off with Morse code as a nod to our origins during World War II. In the Vietnam sections, you have both domino and tap code. CIA analysts rejected the so-called domino theory, favored by many in the US government, that assessed that if Vietnam fell to the forces of communism, then all of Southeast Asia would succumb as well, like a row of dominoes. During the Vietnam War, tap code was used by US prisoners of war and became one of the most covert ways to communicate with each other without captors' knowledge. Binary code covers the ceiling in an area of the museum that focuses on cyber defense, digital footprints, and artificial intelligence. And at the very end of the museum, the ceiling is letter after letter of cipher, just waiting for someone to decode it. Foreign language skills are incredibly important at CIA because we're a global organization that focuses on national security threats all over the world. In this section of the museum, we combined imagery and language to represent the period of the Cold War. The American eagle takes flight at the hammer and the sickle of the Soviet Union, and all of the text is in Cyrillic. In another section, we pay homage to our officers and their language abilities, where everything is written in multiple languages from all over the world. The ceiling looks like a redacted document in the next section that's dedicated to some of the most important Soviet assets during the Cold War, but it contains important information or quotes related to assets, case officers, and counterintelligence. Sometimes CIA can release a document, but to protect our sources and methods, we must redact or black out some of the language before release. We have outlines of famous US aerial reconnaissance methods, missiles over the deep dive in the Cuban Missile Crisis, maps covering CIA's presence during history's most famous wars, and a section that pays homage to 9/11 and CIA's response. We hope you will join us again as we give you a closer look at the new CIA Museum.
CIA Museum would like to introduce our newly renovated museum. Located at CIA's secured headquarters building in Langley, Virginia, CIA Museum is not open to the public. However, we can do the next best thing and open our virtual doors to you. Through this video series, you can view our one-of-a-kind collection, explore our exhibits, and learn about the declassified stories behind some of CIA's most daring missions. The new museum takes you through a chronological history of the CIA, from inception to our most recent declassified missions. There are also in-depth explorations of essential moments in CIA history. Highlights of the renovated museum include engaging interactives to let users dive deeper into CIA missions, and a coded ceiling you won't find anywhere else. Looking up, you'll find codes to break in cipher, binary, tap, and Morse codes, as well as images from CIA history. But the artifacts are the true stars, and the new museum features objects that have never been on display. CIA Museum explains the agency's mission, how we collect information, conceal our methods, and communicate intelligence to our top policymakers. In doing so, the museum supports the creation of vital partnerships to help protect our nation. Current agency officers use these lessons of the past to advance our mission today. And CIA Museum dispels myths about the agency and shares information about CIA directly from the source. In this case, both agency artifacts and officers whose stories are intertwined together. Celebrating both CIA's 75th anniversary as well as CIA Museum's 50th anniversary, we will continue to use agency history to inform, instruct, and inspire. We hope you will join us for additional virtual tours. There will be more to see of the new and improved CIA Museum.
The CIA Museum has never taken an official poll to find out our workforce's favorite artifact. But if we did, this letter written by future Director Helms would probably be high on the list. It speaks to our mission, ridding the world of evil, and the sacrifices our officers make every day in that endeavor. Richard Helms was in the Office of Strategic Services, and during the war, his missions took him all over Europe. While fighting the war, he found this piece of Hitler's personal stationery. He stopped and wrote this eloquent note to his young son, commemorating Victory in Europe Day and explaining why he had been gone so long. He wrote, "Dear Dennis, the man who might have written on this card once controlled Europe 3 short years ago when you were born. Today, he is dead, his memory despised, his country in ruins. He had a thirst for power, a low opinion of man as an individual, and a fear of intellectual honesty. He was a force of evil in the world. His passing, his defeat, a boon to mankind. But thousands died that it might be so. The price of ridding society of bad is always high. Love, Daddy." The price of ridding the world of evil or bad is always high. And here at CIA, there's no more poignant reminder of that price than the stars on our memorial wall. Each of those officers was a part of ridding the world of evil and making this country safer. And just like Director Helms, They often would go out on dangerous missions, leaving behind their families, sometimes young children, with the hopes of making their lives safer and their future brighter. The CIA Museum received this letter as a donation from the Helms family on the day this organization helped bring Osama bin Laden to justice, ridding the world of another great evil.
People might not think that model building is happening in the intelligence community, but it's actually a really important skill that's highly valued, and probably never more than in the lead up to the raid on UBL. But sometimes you need to go bigger, like a full-scale replica. A model was used to brief President Obama and to plan the raid, but for this mission we needed to go bigger. The CIA has an office that actually designs and constructs all of our buildings worldwide. They're a part of our Directorate of Support. They built a full-scale replica of everything you see here for the assault team to practice on. We did not have intelligence, though, into the inside of this house. And so the support team actually created it in a way so that when the team would come in and do a practice run, they would then leave and the support team would come back and they'd reconfigure the rooms, or they'd add stairs or take away stairs. Then the team would come back, do another run, and that way they got more familiar with the space.
The training on the mock-up for every contingency paid off when the first helicopter had to make an emergency landing. But because of the combination of years of intelligence work, highly skilled special operations forces, the model, and the full-scale replica, the team was able to bring Osama bin Laden to justice.
Behind me is the oldest structure on CIA compound. Known as the Scattergood Thorne Conferencing Center, this 4-story Georgian revival house was built in 1926 and was actually privately owned by 2 amazing women, pioneers of the American labor movement, who defied the gender expectations of their time. They didn't work for the CIA, but they lived here on the secure compound for many years. The former owners of this house, Florence Thorne and Margaret Scattergood, both worked for the American Federation of Labor and are credited with significant contributions to the American labor movement, like improving women's rights in the workplace and child labor laws. The women lived on the estate for a decade before federal agencies started to look to purchase land. They wanted the land around this house and the land on which the house was located. But these were not the type of women to just sit by and wait for something to happen, and instead were proactive. And they made a deal with the US government, one where they could purchase the property, but that the women could remain living on it until they both had passed away. In the 1950s, CIA Director Dulles was looking for a location for a new headquarters building to move CIA out of DC. He needed a spot that was easier to secure but still close to policymakers, and felt the land around this house was the perfect location. Construction was about to begin on the new headquarters building, and Margaret and Florence were about to get new neighbors. In 1973, Florence passed away at the age of 95. CIA Deputy Director for Administration, which is now the Directorate of Support, Harry Fitzwater, grew very concerned for Margaret's safety, and so he directed CIA security officers to check on her during their daily rounds. The CIA always tried to be a good and helpful neighbor. Margaret visited headquarters once when she was the guest of honor for a lunch with Director Casey. And over the years, agency officers became friends with Margaret, and they would stop by after work to help her with her yard, pick up grocery lists to do her shopping, and on the holidays, the CIA would send special meals. Sometimes officers would just stop by and sit in rocking chairs on this porch and chat with Margaret about life. This porch is still a favorite spot for CIA officers looking for a moment of quiet in an occupation where there's little quiet and lots of stress-filled days. In 1988, over 25 years after the CIA moved in as her neighbor, Margaret passed away at the age of 92. The land and the house now belong to the CIA, and over the course of several years, there were numerous proposals for what to do with the property. Eventually, the security canine unit moved in. Those wonderful dogs did quite a number on this house, resulting in the decision to move them to a new location and restore the home to its original historic state. In 2003, the house underwent a complete renovation, turning it into a much-needed conference center. The house is now used for training classes and special events, but within the house, there's information on Florence and Margaret and the life they built here. CIA officers who never had the chance to meet Margaret and Florence can learn more about who they were, their contributions to society, and their forever bond to CIA. Today we're going to talk about one of the most critical and classified documents to come out of this country, the President's Daily Brief, more commonly known as the PDB. Contrary to its name, though, it doesn't just go to the President. It actually is received by cabinet members, the National Security Council. But one thing that is important is that it is specific to the preferences of the person who holds the highest office in the country, the President of the United States. Every time a new president takes office, the CIA works to really make sure that we take those preferences into consideration. When John F. Kennedy received his brief, it was known as the President's Intelligence Checklist, or the PICL. When Bush 41 was president, he had the rare insight into our organization that no president before him ever had. He was our director, so he understood how important the intelligence coming out of this organization was, and was the first president to request an in-person briefing of the President's Daily Brief. President Obama was the first president to receive the PDB on a tablet. This was great for our graphics people, as it allowed them the opportunity to create highly sophisticated interactives. The topics of the PDB are going to change based off of what's going on in the world. But one thing that doesn't change is that it is always timely, factual, and non-politicized information. Did you ever wonder what the CIA did to send messages before email? Well, we used tubes like this in a pneumatic tube system that sent messages throughout our headquarters building. When CIA moved to our headquarters at Langley, the plans consisted of a pneumatic tube system. On average, our system sent over 40,000 messages a week and over 2 million a year. The system itself consisted of tubing that was 4 inches and over 25 miles long. 4 routing stations managed our traffic, and on average, our messages would reach their destination in under a minute. The agency's tube system was 4 different systems that were differentiated by color. There was green, amber, red, and metal. The system was a dial-in system, so agency officers were given directories so that they knew where these were going to end up. Basically, what you would do is use the rings. It was a 3-ring system. The top 2 rings identified the station, and the bottom ring identified the station number. So if you wanted to go to FR6, you would line all of the numbers up here. The system included provisions for misdirected or damaged tubes, but the rate of this was very low. Less than 1% did not reach their destination. The CIA's pneumatic tube system was put in place in 1963 and decommissioned in 1989. CIA's tube system was unique in size and the fact that it handled classified material, but pneumatic tube systems were hardly cutting edge. I can say, though, that ours was one of the largest internal systems in the world at the time. The Office of Strategic Services was the predecessor to the CIA during World War II. The creative minds behind winning the war made concealment devices to safely disguise and covertly transport information and supplies from behind enemy lines. The OSS issued these cold concealment devices to sabotage teams. The kit would contain things like turpentine, paint, brushes, and beeswax. The idea was you would want to take the explosive device and conceal it in the form of coal. Then the saboteur would take it to an enemy coal dump. Once there, it would be loaded onto a train or taken to a factory. Once in a furnace, it would detonate and explode. If captured behind enemy lines, OSS officers would definitely have been searched. Having a compass to escape in unfamiliar surroundings would have been very helpful. But if you had one in your pocket, they would have taken it away for sure. Knowing this, the OSS decided to change the buttons on some of our uniforms. They used concealment devices and created buttons that had compasses inside.
The inclination to open something is counterclockwise, but to make sure that the enemies didn't find these compasses, it was actually the opposite. So the more you tried to open it, the tighter it became. Partnerships with private sector companies during the war were so important, and the Eastman Kodak Company created this small camera for the OSS, made to fit in the standard matchbox of the day. You actually could add to its disguise by using a label that was familiar to the area in which we were operating. It had adjustable settings and could actually be operated by feel. All of these concealment devices and more helped the Allies win the war, but they also created a very strong foundation for our Office of Technical Service here at CIA to take concealment devices into the 21st century.
In 1956, the Soviet government banned the book Dr. Zhivago by Russian author Boris Pasternak, who went on to win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1958. So why did they do this to a literary great? Dr. Zhivago negatively, but accurately, portrayed the hardships caused by the Soviet Revolution, communism, and the oppressive Soviet government. Suppressing the publication of this book in the Soviet Union led the CIA on a literary mission. The CIA created small pocket-sized versions of Dr. Zhivago that they could have snuck back into the country. Giving the citizens the opportunity to read a book that was banned really showed them what they were missing. Essentially, the freedom of artist expression and the ability of a populace to choose for themselves what they wanted to read. This was an ongoing U.S. government campaign to promote authors who showed the harsh realities of living in the Soviet Union. The CIA declassified its missions involving Dr. Zhivago in 2014.
In 2021, we celebrate the 60th anniversary of CIA's original headquarters building. President Dwight D. Eisenhower joined Director of Central Intelligence Alan Dulles here to lay the cornerstone right where I'm standing. On November 3rd, 1959, President Dwight D. Eisenhower used this trowel to lay the cornerstone of our new headquarters building. Just 12 years old at the time, the CIA was one step closer to finally having a permanent headquarters. CIA's original headquarters building was designed in the 1950s. The designers used the vision of Alan Dulles, who really wanted officers to work in a college-like campus setting, but wanted us in a secluded and safe area as well. But the key was we needed to be by US policymakers. Construction was completed in 1961, and officers began moving in 1962. In preparation for the move into the headquarters building, the CIA gave officers a book entitled Your New Headquarters Building, which laid out all of the new things that they were going to encounter once inside. It gave an idea of what the facility was like and the services within it. The publication emphasized the up-to-date nature of the new campus. Words such as new and modern and latest appear repeatedly throughout the booklet in phrases such as modern air conditioning and ventilation system, 2 modern self-service type cafeterias, and an automatic dial switchboard of the latest design.
The CIA Museum is committed to providing access to our history in as many ways as possible, so that our officers and our partners can learn about our mission and our people, amazing people like Virginia Hall. This tactile exhibit, a first of its kind here at CIA, is a 3D rendering of our painting, Le Marguerite Flournoy ce soir, by artist Jeffrey Bass. The painting depicts Virginia Hall sending a radio transmission from a barn in occupied France during World War II. Her prosthetic leg, Cuthbert, as she called it, is shown near her radio. The CIA wanted to bring this painting to life for our officers or visitors who have low sight or who are blind. By working with the company 3D PhotoWorks, we were able to create a 3D replica of the painting where you actually set off sensors and hear audio descriptions and sound effects over the exact piece of the painting that you are now feeling.
Shown here, Virginia Hall wears a high-top leather shoe that is laced to...
Buttons at the bottom of the painting explain how to use the tactile exhibit and give in-depth audio information about Virginia Hall's early life, her service during World War II, her post-war life, and a detailed description of the painting.
Used to transmit Virginia Hall's messages in Morse code.
Our art normally has written labels people can see and read, but this interactive allows people with low or no sight the same opportunity to learn about Virginia Hall in this piece of art, though all of our users get more details now than they would from a label. Being the CIA, we couldn't just settle for buying audio of a radio transmission off the internet. So we reached out to 2 former Office of Technical Service officers who volunteered their time to actually recreate a transmission on a World War II era radio.
As she transmits her Morse code message to London.
Virginia Hall sent 37 messages from occupied France while serving with the OSS. This was an incredibly dangerous job, but just one of many dangerous jobs she did, not just for the OSS, but for the SOE and the CIA. She was chosen to be our first accessible painting for her bravery, her service, and because she's an inspiration to those who have overcome challenges in life.
The pigeon camera is one of our older artifacts where parts of the mission are actually still classified. But what I can tell you a little about is why we chose this animal and how it was deployed. The CIA can learn a lot from reconnaissance photography, and with planes like the U-2 and the A-12 and satellites like Corona in the sky, the CIA had a window into a whole new world of intelligence. But unfortunately, those planes are taking photographs from incredible heights. So if we wanted to get into a target area with more detail, the CIA was going to have to get creative and return to the animal kingdom again. CIA's Office of Research and Development created a camera small and light enough to be carried by a pigeon. With the camera attached to its breast, the pigeon would fly over a target area on its return home. With the pigeon being a common species, it was able to conceal itself as an intelligence collection platform among thousands of other birds. Pigeon imagery is taken from hundreds of feet above the target, whereas planes like the A-12 and the U-2 were taking photographs from tens of thousands of feet, and satellites like Corona were miles above the target. The pigeon camera allowed the CIA to have a much more detailed view of what was going on in an area. The camera could begin taking pictures immediately upon release, or it could have a preset delay. The camera took a series of images at a set interval, and there was actually a small battery-operated motor that advanced the film and cocked the shutter. The CIA created and manufactured this 2-man semi-submersible that had no weapons, nearly no endurance, and it actually required a mothership to transport it to its final destination. So what was the point of this small, cramped sub? The semi-submersible was small and quiet, and it could actually approach destinations that other ships could not. It was made of wood and aluminum, which made it really hard to be picked up on radar and sonar detection. It also could be sunk underwater up to 30 feet and left for 4 weeks. The mothership would take the semi-submersible within 50 miles of its objective. Once there, it would actually lower the skiff, which is what this boat is called, into the water. Once in the water, the operator, 1 or 2 officers, and equipment would motor off. If the risk of detection was low, the operator would motor off in a surface mode. But if the risk of detection was high, the operator would actually sink part of the ship until its deck was awash, and they would take off in a semi-submerged mode. But this greatly decreased its speed and range. Once on shore, the operator and crew would unload the skiff, and then it was the operator's responsibility to take the skiff back out into the water and sink it. The procedure was a 19-step process, and other suggestions actually said to tie a rope to the skiff and then swim back to shore and secure that end with a spike. To retrieve the skiff, someone actually had to jump in, swim down without scuba gear, locate it, and then raise it by purging water from the ballast tanks in the crew compartment using compressed air tanks located in the stern. Once the crew compartment was above the water level, the operator and the crew could actually get in, motor off, and return back to the mothership, which sometimes could take up to 10 hours or more.
We're not open to the public here at CIA headquarters. So sometimes when I'm giving a tour, people will ask me, if you're such a super secret organization, why is there a sign on the GW Parkway telling people how to get to the CIA? Or a really large sign at your entrance saying Central Intelligence Agency? Well, it all goes back to this sign right here. The CIA was originally located in downtown DC on E Street. After the war, we took over the location from our predecessor, the Office of Strategic Services. For a long time, there was no sign at the door, so no one really knew our location. That is until one day, President Eisenhower's brother had a meeting with our director, Allen Dulles. The White House driver drove around for quite a while because he could not find our location. This did not make the president very happy. The next day, President Eisenhower called Director Dulles and demanded that a sign be placed at our entrance. He said that the East Street location was well known and that the lack of a sign was fooling no one. The immediate result was that a sign with our seal and name be placed at the entrance. It's hard to imagine a world without GPS or satellite imagery. But in the 1950s, when the CIA created its first photo reconnaissance satellite, codenamed Corona, the technology simply didn't exist. Corona was America's first successful photo reconnaissance satellite, and it captured imagery from 1960 up until 1972. The requirement for gathering intelligence over the Soviet Union increased dramatically after the Soviet Union shot down one of our U-2 aircrafts and captured CIA pilot Francis Gary Powers. 2.5 months later, on its first mission, Corona captured more imagery than all previous U-2 flights. Photo reconnaissance imagery is used for a variety of things, everything from assessing military forces to finding out the production of grain in a country. In this case, Corona was really important because it helped us better understand the buildup of Soviet military power in country. Corona depended on the successful physical recovery of the film, like the film here and this canister from Corona, but it also needed to obtain the images safely from the air and get them back to the ground to be developed. And that's where this parachute bag comes into play. What would happen is we would take the images, they would get rolled onto the film, and they would end up in a capsule or a bucket. They would descend down to Earth with a parachute slowing it. Once it was in a specific zone, a plane would come with a trapeze-type hook, and it would actually hook the parachute, reel it into the plane, bring it back to the ground, and CIA officers would develop the film. Running for 12 years, Corona recorded over 800,000 images, covering 72 million square miles of ground, which historians and environmentalists are still using today. Most importantly, Corona showed that the Soviet Union's bomber and missile buildup was not outpacing the Americans, as some had feared, which allowed our president the opportunity to make better strategic and budgetary decisions. The Corona program was incredibly successful, giving the United States the confidence to pursue arms control agreements, but it did so much more than record the landscape of the Cold War. It was able to provide environmentalists a look at the Earth 10 years before any other country launched resource satellites. Just inside the main entrance of CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, is a white marble wall with a collection of stars etched into the stone. It is the most sacred space on our compound. Each star memorializes a life lost in the line of duty, a sacrifice to our nation. The inscription above the stars read, "In honor of those members of the Central Intelligence Agency who gave their lives in the service of their country." The Book of Honor, on display in front of the memorial wall, contains the names of CIA officers who died in service. Each is written next to a gold leaf star. To protect intelligence sources and methods, some of the names must remain classified even in death. Once a year, though, every name, even those unlisted, is read out loud in recognition at CIA's annual memorial ceremony. CIA officers are administered the oath of office in front of the memorial wall on their first day. The wall not only reminds these new officers of the inherent risks of our work, but it inspires them to continue to carry CIA's mission forward in honor of those who came before them.
CIA's partnership with NGA and NSA was critical to the success of this mission. And the success of those relationships were the result of years of trust built since 9/11, particularly as officers served closely together with a greater appreciation for the other agency's skills, capabilities, and limitations. The CIA and the U.S. military weren't natural working partners either before 9/11, and it likewise took years to build the trust and relationships that ultimately allowed the Abbottabad raid to succeed. Many of the CIA leaders involved in the hunt for bin Laden had known senior military leadership based on shared experiences, which accelerated the trust and collaboration necessary for this sensitive and risky lead to succeed. The bin Laden operation was not restricted to the night of 1 May 2011. It was the culmination of many years that was preceded with a lot of heartache, failure, death, and questioning of whether CIA was even capable of doing this. In the end, it was an analytic lead pursued by technical officers, underpinned by human operations, strengthened with NGA and NSA capabilities, and executed by the U.S. military. It was a hugely collaborative effort, and a testament to both the capabilities and will of our government. We can accomplish whatever we set our minds to do. Part of the reason that we focused on the suspected courier who led us to bin Laden was because we'd already removed dozens of other suspected harborers. This particular courier was one of the last men standing. We realized we had some of the intelligence we needed to begin tracking him buried in files acquired years before we suspected he might actually be with bin Laden. But it took years to untangle the good from the bad intelligence and to figure out exactly who the courier was and, most importantly, where he was living. We had a lot of failures before the success of the lead that ultimately led us to bin Laden. We chased the wrong family member, set up multiple unsuccessful operations to obtain more information on the courier's status, and battled his superior security measures to determine where he might be living. Despite some of those failures, confidence in the lead grew as the intelligence picture failed to provide contradictory evidence that would suggest the courier was not working for bin Laden, or at least involved in suspicious activities. Each data point we collected often led us closer to the hypothesis that he was with bin Laden. That said, we were careful to ensure that we had considered the alternative possibilities and weren't simply confirming our own biases about what the intelligence meant. The commitment of the CIA and the IC officers to persist over years was based on one fact. Bin Laden was directly responsible for the deaths of over 3,000 Americans, and he needed to be brought to justice. The mission was extraordinarily meaningful and well-defined. Having a very clear goal is often how you bring teams to work together to do extraordinary things, despite expected disappointment, low odds, and tough barriers. The team also benefited from knowing that, unlike prior to 9/11, leadership would provide whatever resources were needed due to the urgency of the mission. Before 9/11, the CIA, with support from partners across the intelligence community, was already performing years of intelligence operations and analysis against al-Qaeda. At that time, bin Laden was not a household name and was not yet responsible for any American deaths. We knew bin Laden was on the run by 12 September, and we didn't catch up with him until December 2001, when he fled to the Tora Bora Mountains in eastern Afghanistan. Tora Bora is an extremely rugged and inhospitable area, and bin Laden managed to escape. It remains the only real missed opportunity to find bin Laden after 9/11 until he was located in Abbottabad. Early on in the hunt, our key intelligence question was focused on where bin Laden was hiding, mostly because that was the question policymakers and the public were asking us, where's bin Laden? So we chased reporting that led us unsuccessfully from one location to another. Eventually, our strategy and process evolved, and we realized that while there was no limit to the number of places bin Laden could hide, there was a limit to the number of people who could be involved in safeguarding him. Indeed, al-Qaeda's #1 organizational priority was bin Laden's safety. As a result, we shifted our focus from locations to people who might be with him or know where he was, and those people were bucketed into different categories like family members and couriers. Much of our assessment on who he might be with was based on historical precedent, open source material, and other classified information. Almost all of the thousands of leads we pursued until the Abbottabad raid were false, but our ability to confirm or otherwise assess that a lead would not take us to bin Laden was sometimes productive, and that it continued to shape the picture of who bin Laden was not with, which helped us vector in on who he might be with. However, since it's tough to prove a negative, in some cases it took years to make the call that a lead was not getting us any closer to bin Laden and not worth pursuing. In other cases, we continued to pursue leads for years, right up until the day bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad. We confirmed after his death that bin Laden disappeared into Pakistan in early 2002. The goal during that period was to maximize intense pressure on the enemy so that they had to spend their time hiding, protecting themselves, and worried about security, making it harder for them to generate a major operation. By 2006, however, al-Qaeda had fully adapted to operations in the major cities by relocating to a remote, largely ungoverned part of Pakistan known as the federally administered tribal areas, or the FATA. From there, we realized that they were still potent and could still continue to pull off spectacular attacks, independent of bin Laden's presence or direct leadership. With proof of al-Qaeda's resilience and armed with largely good intelligence on the group, we began focusing on the structure in the FATA to both prevent it from pulling off another 9/11 and, robbed of his most trusted subordinates, force bin Laden into two choices: further isolate into irrelevance or move out of hiding into our crosshairs. Maybe if I just loosen up. Hold on, let me stretch. Why did it take so long to find bin Laden? On 9/11, CIA's exploitation of the flight manifests revealed that al-Qaeda and bin Laden were responsible for the attacks in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington, D.C. So it was clear from the very beginning who the new enemy was. On the same day, CIA received credible reporting that bigger attacks were underway. It wasn't clear, however, where the new threats were coming from. It took many years to bring bin Laden to justice for two primary reasons. First, finding bin Laden was not our sole or first priority after 9/11. It was thwarting what seemed an inevitable and bigger follow-up attack and safeguarding America and our allies. Our strategy was focused on 1, collecting intelligence to stop future attacks, 2, undermining al-Qaeda and removing it from its safe haven in Afghanistan and later Pakistan, and 3, finding the individuals responsible for attack planning and leading the organization, including but not limited to bin Laden. Second, bin Laden was physically isolated from his organization and in deep hiding in a sovereign country under the patronage of 2 relatively unknown brothers, one of whom was an al-Qaeda courier.
The CIA uses all-source intelligence. This means we'll look at things like photographs from satellites or other cameras. We'll use open source, which is looking at the news or things on the internet that are open to the public. We also use human, which is collecting intelligence from our human assets. And another thing that we'll take a look at is the environment to get another piece to our intelligence puzzle. So knowing this, the CIA created a UUV, unmanned underwater vehicle, and we made it a fish. Its name is Charlie, and this is its partner, Charlene. Some of Charlie's capabilities include maneuverability, speed and depth control, autonomy, and radio communications. Charlie was controlled by a radio handset. Say you're interested in a group and you want to learn more about them. You could deploy Charlie into a river. He would swim upstream and collect a water sample. Bring it back to CIA, and now our scientists can test it to see if there's things like nuclear runoff or biochemical agents present in the water. And now, thanks to Charlie, you have a better understanding of what's going on in that specific place.
What did James Bond, Batman, Agent Sidney Bristow, and John Wayne have in common? They all use the Fulton Skyhook system in daring and over-the-top moments on film. Sometimes screenwriters in Hollywood come up with imaginative and over-the-top things that you think, would that actually work in real life? But here at CIA, we create or use things all the time that don't just work in real life. They're actually important parts of intelligence collection. This suit was used in the Fulton Skyhook system, but these boots and helmet were actually worn by Lieutenant Leonard Leshak of the US Navy on one of the coolest or coldest missions of all time. You see, the United States and the Soviet Union weren't just aggressively competing for things like missiles and satellites. We were also vying for our understanding of the Arctic for scientific and military purposes. In 1961, the United States found an abandoned Soviet research station, and US Naval Research decided to go after this rare intelligence find, and Operation Cold Feet was born. Unfortunately, Naval Research ran out of money, but the CIA picked up the project using our proprietary cover airline, Intermountain Aviation, with two skilled pilots, Connie Seagrass and Douglas Price, who were very experienced at exfiltration using World War II-era B-17s. On May 28, 1962, Leshak and Major James Smith parachuted down onto the ice. They actually took photographs of all of the facility and discovered over 150 pounds of paperwork, samples, and equipment. It was a trove of intelligence that the Soviets left behind. They were only supposed to be in this harsh environment for 72 hours, but due to fog, their pickup was delayed by a day. On the day of the pickup, it was still foggy, and there were 30-knot winds on the surface. But the B-17 came roaring in 425 feet above the ground and picked up the bag full of all of the intelligence. Next, it was Leshak's turn, and things did not go very well for him at first. He was pulled across the ice for 300 feet on his stomach before being able to correct his position. You see, you're supposed to be facing against the wind, but he was facing towards the wind. But he was able to adjust himself before being pulled on board. Then it was Smith's turn, and the same thing happened at first. He was pulled across the ice, but he was able to actually get one of his boots in a crack on the ice and turn his body before being brought on board. Because of this courageous and resourceful team, the CIA was now in possession of Soviet technology related to under-ice acoustics and anti-submarine warfare tactics. Bet you'll never look at Batman the same after this.
So what happened during this, at the end of this 21 months that he provided us these documents? Well, we had some problems with one of the drops he made for us in April of 1977. It seems that there were some anomalies in the package when we opened it, and we became very concerned that something had happened to him. But we proceeded then to plan for the next drop, which was the end of June. And I went to the drop site as I had before, and there was a terrible rainstorm that night. And as I went to pick up his package to us on my return visit, when I went back to the site after waiting 30 minutes, I discovered that Trigon's package was on the ground. He had not been there that night. So our next drop to him was on July 15th. It was on the top of a railroad bridge along the pedestrian walkway. I proceeded as I had before. I walked to the bridge, I went on top of the bridge, and I took the package out of my bag and put it into the drop site. I waited a few minutes in the middle of the bridge and then returned down the steps of the bridge. And before I got to the bottom of the bridge, 3 men came across the street and grabbed me. It was clear that Trigon had been arrested. They searched my purse and they went and retrieved the package, so they already knew where it was. They took me to Lubyanka prison, where they did a very minor interrogation, and after several hours, I was allowed to leave. I returned to Washington the next day and met with the headquarters officers as we tried to discover what had happened to Trigon. We learned later on that Trigon had been compromised by a contract employee in the CIA who had been translating some audio tapes that we had of Trigon. But Trigon's providing this information to us helped us through a very tense and difficult time between the United States and the USSR during the Cold War. And he has been called a hero, and I consider him to be a hero as well. It was November 5th of 1975 when I arrived in Moscow. I was a single woman arriving there late in the afternoon. It was dark, it was frigid, it was the Brezhnev era. That means that the government was very intolerant of foreigners, and the Americans who worked there in the embassy were very much watched and listened to and kept all together. I was the only female operations officer. I discovered that no one was following me. My chief of station, who had selected me for this position, he said that the Soviet KGB probably would not pay any attention to me because I was a woman. This was a great boon because then they realized that I had the freedom to move around the city without being followed. Why was CIA in Moscow at the time? In one case, we had recruited a Soviet official in a Latin American capital. We codenamed him Trigon, and he was a very bright, very capable officer in the Soviet embassy. He was in a position in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs where he had access to all the Soviet ambassadors' documents that they sent back from Soviet embassies all around the world. Our main goal then was to get him his miniature camera so that he could sit at his desk and take pictures of all these documents. So we recruited him, and he agreed to come back to Moscow to work secretly for the CIA. He required that we give him a poison pen when he got back to Moscow, so that in the event he was arrested and faced torture, he could commit suicide. This decision was made at the highest part of our government, and we all agreed that this was probably a moral thing to do. My job was to communicate with Trigon. We were restricted to what were dead drops. These were caches that we put in very obscure places. He knew where it was, and of course, I knew where it was. This was always at night under the cover of darkness. It worked very well. We minimized the time that the package was on the ground and the risk of leaving a valuable package with film in it. So we did this many times in Moscow, and we were absolutely shocked at what headquarters said about the value of the information he was providing. He was giving us material that we had no other way of obtaining. It was our window on what was happening in the Soviet Union during this very hot time in the Cold War.
As the coordinator of information, William Donovan wanted a cryptographic unit set up from scratch, and he wanted it done quickly. So he turned to a woman who was well on her way to becoming the mother of cryptology. Her name was Elizabeth Friedman. By the time Donovan tapped Miss Friedman's talents in 1941, she had already successfully transformed the cryptographic unit within the U.S. War Department during World War I. She decoded hundreds of messages between rum runners during Prohibition, and she became the first female codebreaker for the U.S. Treasury Department and the United States Coast Guard. Though only on loan to Donovan for 3.5 weeks, Ms. Friedman set up one of the most successful units within the OSS. She created a list of recommendations and sent it to Donovan, and it's our understanding that he actually implemented every single one. Like so many women who helped win the war, her amazing success stories mostly went untold, but are gradually coming to the surface. Though it was with the U.S. Coast Guard and not the OSS, Ms. Friedman and her team cracked cipher settings on 3 Enigma machines during the course of World War II. This is a woman who would have had countless awards and accolades, but instead they went to a man whom she trained and who actually worked for her, Ordeman Sr. Just like Donovan, the CIA works every day with our military and intelligence community partners on national security issues. And just like tapping Ms. Friedman, we always want to bring expertise and talent to solve the biggest problems this country faces every day. This is CIA trailblazer Eloise Page, who served in multiple positions in the Directorate of Operations during her 4-decade career here at CIA. Ms. Page started her career as an administrative assistant in the office of General Donovan, which soon became the Office of Strategic Services. During World War II, she served in the counterintelligence area within the OSS. After World War II, she was sent to Brussels to run post-war operations there. When the CIA was created in 1947, Ms. Page joined the Science and Technology Division, where she ran technical requirements and scientific operations for the DO through the 1950s. And in 1979, Ms. Page became the first female chief of station. Imagine that, for 32 years, the CIA had stations all over the globe, but only men held the highest position in country, chief of station. That is, until Eloise Page came in and broke through that glass ceiling with her sophisticated white gloves, a staple that she wore throughout most of her agency career. This is no ordinary dragonfly. It got its spy wings in the 1970s after the CIA's Office of Research and Development created Insectothopter. And even though it was never operational, it's still one of our favorite artifacts to share. The dragonfly was selected for this program after the bumblebee turned out to not work quite so well. Bumblebees fly in really erratic patterns, and so it would have been noticed if it stopped to hover, and someone may have batted it away because they do sting. This dragonfly was intended to be a listening device. It had a small engine that would make its wings flap up and down, and it was directed and guided by a bimetallic strip on the back and a laser beam. It could actually fly 200 meters in 60 seconds. This data link actually back here with the laser was how we were able to intercept the sound that it was picking up. The CIA Dragonfly ultimately proved not to be operational because in crosswinds over 5 miles an hour, it just was taken off of its trajectory. But it stimulated further research into using UAVs, which this was the smallest of its kind at this point in history. Did you know that the phrase "we can neither confirm nor deny" started right here at CIA? Known as the Glomar response, this was the CIA's reply to the press after we went on an undercover mission to retrieve a Soviet submarine from the depths of the ocean. In 1968, a Soviet K-129 missile submarine sank to the bottom of the ocean, about 16,500 feet. That's almost 11 Empire State Buildings. It sank to the bottom and the Russians couldn't find it, but we did, and we wanted to go after it. It wasn't safe enough, though, for us to just go out in a US Navy carrier. And we also needed to create the technology that would go down and grab the submarine from the bottom of the ocean floor and that vessel to house it. So really what we needed was the perfect cover mechanism, and that came in the form of Howard Hughes. The Hughes Glomar Explorer was first of its kind deep sea mining technology, because that was the cover. Howard Hughes was going to mine the ocean floor for these manganese nodules. But really, CIA was on the vessel. Everything within the cover had to look legitimate, though. Even this mailbag, or the overalls that were worn by the crew. We created a claw. It's sort of like if you've ever played that game at an arcade where
You take the claw and you maneuver it down and you grab the stuffed animal. It's a lot like that, except you're going to pull up a multi-ton submarine from the bottom of the ocean. The claw was named Clementine, miner 49er and his daughter Clementine. Unfortunately, the claw did buckle as it was pulling the submarine up from the bottom of the ocean, and part of the sub broke off. Much of what we retrieved is actually still classified. Even though we didn't get all of the sub on our first try, we wanted to go back and retrieve the rest. We worked really hard to keep this out of the press, as it would expose our officers, possibly putting them in danger. It would not allow for us to go back to get the rest of the submarine, and in this case, it would have exposed a really important cover mechanism in Howard Hughes. Unfortunately, this article in the LA Times sank our efforts. When the press started inquiring, we realized that saying yes to some things and no to others may give them too many breadcrumbs. And to protect our mechanisms, our methods, and our people, we came up with the phrase, "We can neither confirm nor deny." When the movie Argo came out, people immediately started asking, did that really happen? Did CIA actually create a fake movie studio with a script and a production company? The CIA created this cover to exfiltrate 6 US State Department employees out of Tehran, Iran. They had taken refuge in the homes of Canadian embassy employees after militant Islamic students took over the US Embassy. With fake documents and disguises, the CIA entered Iran to exfiltrate the Canadian Six, as they became known. With the help of a motion picture consultant, our team set up essentially a dummy company, Studio 6 Productions. We set up shop on the old Columbia Studio lot in California. We started going through scripts and found one called Argo, with original artwork by Jack Kirby of the Marvel Universe. It was really perfect for our team because it had sort of this sci-fi Middle Eastern theme to it, which terrain-wise worked perfectly for our team to go in looking at scouting locations to film this movie. President Jimmy Carter had to sign off on this plan, which was created by CIA officers that were in the Office of Technical Services. The plan was to go in as a movie studio, scouting film locations. Something so ridiculous that they thought it would not raise any suspicion. On the morning of January 28th, 1980, they went through the airport, got on the plane, and safely were in the air. Once they were out of Iranian airspace, a sigh of relief came over the entire crew.
Soviet radar picked up the CIA's U-2 photo reconnaissance first overflight, so the CIA knew early on that we needed to fly higher and faster. Codenamed Oxcart, the A-12 was a true feat in aviation technology, flying at 90,000 feet, which was 20,000 feet higher than its older brother, the U-2, and at speeds reaching Mach 3.29, the A-12 was destined to be the fastest plane in the sky. In the 1950s, the CIA partnered with Lockheed to create the A-12, and development required new technologies. Meeting the desired characteristics led to innovation in things like mechanics, materials, and engine technology. Even creating a plane that could withstand heat at Mach 3.29 was quite a challenge. The A-12 took its first flight at Area 51 on April 26, 1962, and in May, it broke the sound barrier, flying at Mach 1.1. In May and August of 1965, it actually set speed and altitude records, flying at 90,000 feet and Mach 3.29. That's almost 2,500 miles per hour. Unfortunately, the CIA lost 2 pilots flying the A-12, both of whom are on our memorial wall here at CIA headquarters. The CIA and Lockheed built 15 A-12s, and 3 flew operationally over the southeast part of Asia during the Vietnam War. But by this point in history, CIA had a decision to make. Do we risk pilots being shot down as Soviet and enemy air defense systems improve, or do we move fully to photo reconnaissance satellites for our imagery? The Air Force's SR-71 Blackbird superseded the A-12, and in 1968, the CIA A-12 program ceased. The A-12's last mission was flying over North Korea after they seized the USS Pueblo in 1968.
Not all concealment devices are used for dead drops. Our officers here at CIA often make technology that has to remain hidden in plain sight.
These seismic detectors were designed by CIA officers to look like animal dung. Very gross, but that was on purpose. They were made to blend in on the Ho Chi Minh Trail during the Vietnam War. Our intelligence saw that an attack was coming, as the communists were building up forces. We created these so that we could find out movement on the ground, and they would pick up the data and actually send it back to our officers. They would know when and how heavy things were moving on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, so they could tell if there was a large troop movement, even things like trucks or elephants. All of this data was then handed over to the US military, and it was used to perform airstrikes. Anyone can say they're CIA. To prove their true affiliation, our officers will sometimes carry or wear something when they go to meet an asset. This way they can tell friend from phony. These cufflinks were worn by Lieutenant Colonel Popov, who was the first GRU Soviet intelligence officer to spy for the Americans in the 1950s. He provided valuable intelligence on the military to the United States for over 5 years. They were designed by a CIA officer and West Point graduate to resemble the West Point crest of duty, honor, country. One set of the cufflinks were given to Popov, and the other was given to his case officer, George Kiesbalter, who was a trailblazer here at CIA. In 1959, Popov came under Soviet suspicion and was arrested. The CIA has officers whose stories sound more like they're from a superhero movie. But here at CIA, we have a saying: we're just ordinary people doing extraordinary things. One of our officers who did extraordinary things was Virginia Hall, the most highly decorated female civilian of World War II. This Distinguished Service Cross right here is how she got that distinction. Hall was born in Maryland, but while in London, she was recruited by the SOE, the Special Operations Executive, which was essentially the same as the OSS here in the United States. They sent her over undercover as an American journalist, and she went into France to try to set up assets and informants and get information. She also helped down pilots get out of France and back to the UK. She unfortunately became one of the most wanted people in all of France, and so she had to escape. She hiked through the Pyrenees and into Spain. Once in Spain, she was unfortunately arrested, but as soon as she was freed, she went back to the SOE and asked to return to France to do more work. They said this was far too dangerous, and so she quit, and she joined the OSS here in the United States. We sent her in, but we didn't send her in as just Virginia Hall, knowing she was wanted. We sent her in disguise as an old woman. Hall spoke French and German fluently, so while over there, she was able to listen in on the Nazis' plans. She also would scout locations for major drops, things like supplies and personnel. She scouted locations for sabotage missions, so blowing up railroad tracks and roads to cut off the Nazi supplies. She also had over 1,500 French resistance forces fighting under her leadership. And most importantly, she sent radio transmissions, which was one of the most dangerous things you could do in France at the time. She did all of these extraordinary things while being a woman and having a prosthetic leg. The mission of the CIA Museum is to inform, instruct, and inspire. This steel column taken from the World Trade Center after the attacks on September 11th is emblematic of that mission. This outdoor memorial is a poignant reminder of the lives we lost that day and the tragedy that struck our shores. And it also reminds us of the work we must do here at CIA every day to ensure national security. This rusted column weighs 9,000 pounds, and it stands 17 feet tall. It was taken from the World Trade Center Building 6. Our current director, Gina Haspel, once said of the 9/11 anniversary that it is not just a time to remember the lives lost, but also the resilience of the American people. And that CIA today is still taking the fight to the enemy with the same energy, focus, and commitment. Not everything you see in movies depicting CIA is fake. Take dead drops, for instance. It's actually a common form of communication used by CIA officers and their assets in the field, especially in high counterintelligence areas where it's too dangerous for them to meet in person. Our officers will place messages or, say, film in a concealment device. They'll put it in a predetermined location, known as a dead drop, and then the asset will come and pick it up. When we're creating a dead drop concealment device, we want to make sure that it's something so common that it will blend in with its surroundings, or make it so disgusting that no one would ever think to pick it up. Take this rat, for example. Disgusting, right? No one would ever want to pick up a dead rat. And so our officers in the Office of Technical Services thought this would be a great way to conceal things. They treated the rat, they cut it open and created a cavity. And this way our officers could put things like money or one-time pads, even film inside here, sew it up, place it at the dead drop location, and then the asset could come and pick it up. Foolproof, right? That's what we thought. But we just figured we were worrying about humans picking up our rat. During the testing phase, cats started stealing our rats. And now you've got two people risking their lives for information and cats taking it. We didn't want to abandon the plan, though, so our officers actually tried animal deterrents, things like cayenne pepper and Tabasco sauce, and settled on something called wormwood oil. They would have our officers douse the rat with the wormwood oil before placing it in the dead drop location. General Donovan was the head of the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was the predecessor to the CIA during World War II. Today we're going to talk about an artifact and a story that definitely fit with Donovan's nickname, which was Wild Bill Donovan. This .22 caliber high standard weapon was commercially available, but the OSS wanted it silent so that they could use it in the field. In 1944, the OSS came through on their project, and Donovan proudly took the weapon down to the White House. When he arrived, though, the president was a little occupied. He was dictating a letter to his secretary. Donovan grew impatient and decided to set up a sandbag and decided to fire 10 rounds while the president was dictating this letter. After the president was finished, and Donovan said that he had actually fired the weapon, the president just sort of laughed it off as a joke, thinking there's no way you fired a weapon in a high security room like this. But after Donovan showed him the sandbag, which had holes in it, he was impressed. So impressed, to the dismay of Donovan, that the president actually kept the weapon, and it's still on display at his presidential library in Hyde Park, New York. CIA had the first American boots on the ground in Afghanistan 15 days after the attacks on 9/11. A CIA aircrew flew the Jawbreaker team into Afghanistan on this Mi-17 behind me, taking the fight directly to the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. We chose this helicopter for a variety of reasons. One was because it did well in high altitudes. Another was because local forces were flying this in country, which allowed our officers to blend in. On September 26, 2019, the CIA had the distinct honor of dedicating this Mi-17 helicopter on our compound. Present that day were all of the members of the original first flight in, who, like many who came after them, risked their lives for their country. The Mi-17 is one of the largest installations on this compound, second only to the A-12 Oxcart aircraft.